Government's advice not to work at cross purposes with the country's security agencies as senior police officials meet in Imo State on the 2023 election.
President Muhammadu Buhari departs for London, United Kingdom.
Troops are used in New Abuja, Niger State capture terrorists.
Good morning, Nigeria today to review the country's national security strategy.
And now for several days, some embassies located in Abuja, talking about the United States, United Kingdom, Canada, Bulgaria, among others, reduced their activities on their premises as a result of advisories issued by their governments on an imminent attack, or a terror attack on the Federal Capital Territory FCT, that is Abuja.
Now, this development has led to apprehension among residents, both foreign and local, in the FCT, and some foreigners, of course, have been traveling out with their families. And President Muhammadu Buhari has, however, advised residents to remain calm, reiterating the Council of Security Agencies that things are under control.
And a crucial security meeting was convened by the President on Monday, that's yesterday, to further strategize on the best options to improve security. Another security meeting also took place in Imo State to further enhance operations.
That's right. Now, foreign governments have also been advised not to work at cross purposes with Nigerian security forces by not creating panic in the country, because there were reactions from several quarters on the way the advisory by the foreign embassies was announced and the content of the advisory, which some interpreted as not being exactly the correct position of things in the Federal Capital Territory.
And though all were quite concerned by the development, security experts have been pointing out several efforts to stem the tide of insecurity across the country, including the FCT.
Now they draw attention to several arrests of some terrorists in Kaduna and Niger states, as well as some of the arrests that have been made in the Federal Capital Territory itself.
And these successes are in addition to voluntary surrender of arms by terrorists and their families in the northeast and west of the country, among other successes.
Well, these issues, of course, continue to generate concerns on the need to rejig the country's national security strategies. And all this, of course, are ahead of preparations for the 2023 elections, which are now getting heated up with the campaigns.
Yeah, sure. And this is certainly too adding to the anxiety of many. We will be reviewing the country's national security strategies. And Good Morning Nigeria today. I am Yusuf Wilson, welcoming you to the program.
And I'm Kingsley Osadolo. I join my colleague Nadabo to also welcome you to Good Morning Nigeria this Tuesday. As always, we are on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority, broadcasting live from our Abuja headquarters studios. In the course of the program, we'll have our complimentary segments, and this will include newspaper review and business. For now, Comfort Amodu joins us with the highlights of the morning news. Good morning, Comfort.
Good morning, Kingsley and Nadabo. Good morning, Nigerians. Here's the morning news. In the build-up to the 2023 general elections, President Muhammadu Buhari has made a strong case for the Nigerian police force to remain apolitical, firm and loyal to the nation's democratic values, as it is the only way the police can truly be defined as true friends of the citizens, dependable and trustworthy partners in the drive to advancing democracy. This was while declaring open the conference and retreat for senior police officers in Owerri, Imo State.
Of police to sustain his leadership standard that will guarantee a level playing field and secure public space for the citizens to freely exercise their franchise and for the outcome of elections to be a true reflection of the people's choices. I offer my full assurances
The nation's security agencies say there is no cause for alarm and urge Nigerians to go about their lawful businesses without fear of any kind. Foreign partners are also advised not to work across purposes by creating unnecessary panic in the country. This was the message after an emergency national security meeting called by President Muhammadu Buhari with security chiefs and the leadership of the Nigerian police, which focuses on the current state of security in the country.
There's no cause for alarm, and Nigerians should go about their normal duties as the armed forces and all the security agencies are well poised to protect them accordingly.
To work together, not to defeat the purpose of what we're trying to achieve, which is full security in our country.
President Muhammadu Buhari has left Nigeria for London, the British capital, ahead of his routine medical checkup. The president was seen off at the Sam Mbakwe International Airport, Owerri, by the governor of Imo State, Governor Hope Uzodinma, shortly after declaring open a 3-day retreat for senior police officers. Also at the airport to bid him farewell were the Chief of Defense Staff General Lucky Irabo, Chief of Army Staff Lieutenant General Farouk Yahaya, and other top military police officers.
There's nothing to say. He is unwell. As you and all Nigerians will have seen in the last couple of days, he's been up and about, carrying out the affairs of his office with a lot of enthusiasm, energy, running up and down the country. The president is okay. He has a routine medical check.
Following the failed mission of terrorists on 221 Battalion Cantonment, Wawa, Nibusa, Niger State, combined efforts of the Joint Task Force and youths in the area have paid off. This is with the arrest and dislodgement of some men, a few of them with gunshot wounds, who were apparently trapped in the woods and came out to look for food. The terrorists who were arrested at different locations, including Gado Village, Oil Bush, were handed over to the military at Wawa Police Station. And as at the time of this report, the Nigerian military is yet to make official statement to this effect. More than 1.5 million Nigerians are to be engaged as ad hoc personnel to conduct the National Population and Housing Census billed for April 2023. Opening the portal in Abuja, NPC Chairman Nasir Isakwara reaffirms the Commission's commitment to ensure fairness and transparency in all census programs towards achieving a credible census outcome.
Personnel for the 2023 census will be drawn from the communities where they are resident.
The adoption of these recruitment approaches to ensure widespread applications from all over localities in the country, minimize bias, and ascertain that all qualified Nigerians are given equal opportunity to apply.
That's the news for now. The program continues with Kingsley and Nadabo after this break. I'm Comfort Amadu. Good morning.
Now, list of business. The Executive Secretary, National Sugar Development Council, NSDC, that is, Zach Adedeji, has solicited the support of governors of sugar producing states in the country towards the revitalization of the sugar subsector. Details of this with Alika Opanachi Arua.
The Executive Secretary, National Sugar Development Council, NSDC, Zach Adedeji, requires the input of critical stakeholders towards the revitalization of the sugar subsector. Adedeji, who made the appeal during a visit to the governor of Nasarawa State and chairman Forum of Governors of Sugar Producing States, Sule Abdullahi in Lafia, Nasarawa State, said that state governors are landlords of sugar projects in their respective domains and have contributed to the modest success so far recorded in the industry. while commending them for creating a safe and enabling environment for sugar operators to go about their business activities without hitches. He says the forum has contributed to the peace enjoyed across communities hosting sugar projects across states. Governor Abdullahi Sule, in his remarks, pledged the continued support of the forum as a product of the sector who understands the opportunities and its numerous potentials. Recall that the federal government had in 2013 began the implementation of a 10-year master plan to revamp sugar sector known as the Nigerian Sugar Master Plan, NSMP. The four major objectives, which are for Nigeria to attain self-sufficiency in sugar production, stem the rising tide of sugar importation, create job opportunities for Nigerians, and the generation of electricity and production of ethanol for industrial purposes. The first phase of the plan is expected to end in the first quarter of 2023. With Business News, Alika Opanachi, Arua.
Thank you very much, Alika Opanachi Arua, for the business news package. Coming up next, newspaper review.
All right, let's talk more about what we have this morning on the papers. We have three papers. Daily Sun is here, Leadership is here, and of course the Blueprint is here. Let's get started with the Leadership newspaper and let's see what we have on its front page this beautiful Tuesday morning. The Leadership newspaper, the front page has the following stories, and beginning from the top, it's a story on page 14 of the paper. It says, and I quote, "I was shot in the head. Ex-UI Deputy Vice Chancellor Abuja tells abduction story." And on page 8, again, President off to London for medical checkup. Coming down a little down under the masthead, we have the following stories. One is on page 7, and it says, "Rising wheat corn prices may worsen food crisis in Nigeria." Rising wheat and corn prices may worsen food crisis in Nigeria. You get details of that on page 7. And there are some fusillade at 20 right above that. We have Twitter intends to charge $20 monthly on verified accounts. And we also have Senate Pros Ministry of Justices, that is 2.2 billion naira expenditure. Details of that on page 2 and some other today in history, if you may wish to go through and find out what happened today in history. That's going to be on page 2. The big story on the Leadership newspaper is about politics. It says, campaign, "We are not broke," say Labour Party and NNPP on page 7. "We are not broke," say Labour Party and NNPP. And PMB warns police and says, "Will of Nigerians must prevail in 2023. On page 4, and the RSR says officers must not aid rigging, and that we have not released LP manifesto yet, says Obi, the presidential candidate. A little bit to the left of the paper, we have these stories, three of which have one on page 10. It says, "Nigeria at risk of importing Ebola virus, NCDC warns," page 10. "I didn't need to consult Fashoranti before Afenifere endorsed Obi," says Adebanjo, page 20. And on page 7, we have this story. It says, "U.S. terror alert needless, no cause for alarm," says the federal government. Can we move a little bit to the Daily Sun newspaper and then see what's up there? And then after going through the Leadership, let's have the Daily Sun and then see what we have on the front page of the Daily Sun newspaper. Daily Sun place, let's have it. Yeah, there it is. Right at the top, we have herdsmen list conditions for peace in communities and then demand gazetting of 415 graves of reserves. You have details of that on page 6. Uzodinma 6 mandatory oath taken by candidates against violence on page 26. Abuja terrorism alert, federal government confirms suspects arrest And the riders are, says security concerns raised by United States, United Kingdom being addressed. The other rider is urges Nigerians to go about businesses without fear. Details on page 6. Moving down a little, we have Buhari jets out for a 2-week medical checkup that is in London. Details on page 27. And on page 28, Obi disowns manifesto in circulation, says it's not approved. And on page 4 of the Daily Sun, we have my salary stopped for exposing corruption at Finance Ministry, claims female staff. Still on page 4, ex-UI DVC recounts close shave with death in kidnapper's den. On page 2 of the Daily Sun, we have letter of credit saga. Yerima seeks federal government support for earpiece. A page a little bit further, on page 3, state of execution, Nnamdi Kanu heads to Supreme Court. Now, on the other story, on the Sun newspaper, as you can see, is Buhari warns police against unprofessional conduct during elections. You have details of that on page 26, and the rider is reiterates commitment to credible election. And finally, at the foot of the page, we have Atiku mocks Tinubu over a visit to Fashoranti. On page 6, there are the stories trending on the Daily Sun. Yes, what do we have?
Yes, I also have a copy of the Blueprint newspaper, and we'll take a look at the stories on the window page of the Blueprint. 5 days after planned Naira redesign, FX scarcity worsens. Currency crashes, 800 Naira to $1 at parallel market. Decision ill-timed will worsen economy, Katiku warns. Federal government to citizens, US, UK, Germany, and others terror alerts false and irresponsible. Urges Nigerians and residents to go about their businesses. They can't scare us in Nigeria. That's Governor Sule of Nasarawa. We're on top of the situation, Irabo assures. That's General Lucky Irabo, Chief of Defense Staff. Buhari jets out to London on medical vacation. Details of that story on page 6. Tech Fund as the harbinger of research and learning. That should be a special report on page 20. Avocado pear has several economic potentials. DG RMRDC, that is Raw Material Research Development Council. NCC committed to federal government's anti-corruption crusade. Court dismisses group's bid to stop certificate forgery suit against Tinubu. At last, $1.5 billion Lekki Deep Sea Port completed. 170,000 jobs expected. Outsourcing of garment making from UAE and Senegal over soon. That's according to Naseni. South Africa's biggest bank out to acquire banks in Nigeria and Kenya. These are the headlines from the front pages of all the 3 papers that we have. I just read the last one now being the front page of the Blueprint newspaper. So,
all of those seem to have, a lot of stories in common, talking about the president jetting out, talking about, the Labour Party's manifesto, the security issue, and the rest of them. But I'm very much concerned here, Kingsley, about one story on the leadership newspaper, especially on the front page here, the details of which is on page 7. It says, rising wheat, corn prices may worsen food crisis in Nigeria. Now, the issue at stake here is, one would just start by asking the question of what have we really done as such in order to maybe learn from our past mistakes and, of course, from the lessons of today in order to make tomorrow better for all of us. We knew exactly what really happened during the COVID-19 days and, of course, what the promises were as regards how so naked, some say we were during the crisis as regards health facilities and equipments and the rest of them. And the promises were right there then that a lot is going to be done to change the face of health in Nigeria and the health facilities most especially. Here we are again facing almost the same crisis of food and the rest of them. The Russia-Ukraine crisis is there, trying to starve the whole world of wheat and some other grains, and of course compounded here in some parts of the world by the flood and some other natural disasters. The main concern here is what plans do we have as individuals and as governments towards forestalling such in the next 5 to 10 years? Because there should be a plan in place, because this is the beginning of the crisis. That's what the world inherits. It is built on crisis. It keeps moving on crisis. Whenever there is a food crisis, especially in this regard, where some countries here try to use it as a weapon, it seems as an individual, as a nation, we should, as a matter of urgency, look towards forestalling it by putting in place a very robust, I must say, plan. Kingsley?
Well, good points you raised, Nadabo, in terms of the nation's food security. Incidentally, the Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development was also at the National Assembly yesterday for his budget defense. And one of the stories inside the papers points to the fact that the minister was given assurance that two events, the floods and insecurity, would not occasion food insecurity in Nigeria. That's one leg. But you're pointing out an externality, that's to say an event that is outside of our control, namely the war in Ukraine. In the early part of the war, which started in February this year, and the Russians mounted a blockade on the export of grains from the ports in Ukraine, we saw the trigger for the price increase for bread and other flour-based products. Bread went from 400 and something to 500, 600 and something. Now it's around about 700, 800. Because it was said that there was going to be wheat scarcity. If you even look at some of the products that are wheat-based, such as spaghetti, the price of spaghetti went up. This is just aside from the pressure on the naira in terms of its exchange rate at the parallel market. The price of wheat went up, and I think there were some stories that also circulated on social media. I think somebody was diligent enough to have counted the number of sticks in the spaghetti, and he said even the number has reduced because spaghetti is made
about the size too.
The size, yes, spaghetti is made from wheat.
Yeah.
At that time, the Nigerian government, through the National Food Security Council, kicked into motion, and then a number of measures were announced, but we do not appear to have seen the impact of what those measures were on the prices of wheat-based or grain-based fruits, and other confectionaries, because the prices, as I said, are still high up there. And you're talking about a strategic goal of, say, 5 to 10 years. What do we do now? The Russia and United Nations and Turkey brokered a deal to say, okay, we would allow grain exports from the ports used by Ukraine. And this week, of course, the Russians have now said that they cannot guarantee the safety of ships that are taken off with grains. When they say they are suspending, they're not do that. When they say they are suspending, Adabo. So is that going to be another round of pressure for? And the simple question is, on the basis of what you said, they say, look, what is our strategic goal? What has happened to the blueprint or other measures outlined by the National Food Security Council on the heels of the grains crisis arising from the Ukraine war? A number of countries, if you recall, we mentioned the African continent has been the worst hit by the embargo on the shipment of grains out of Ukraine. Egypt, threw in all kinds of domestic measures to boost their grain production, especially wheat. What is it that we have done here?
Well, that's a very pertinent question, and that's a question all of us must really try to address. As I said earlier on, that this may be the beginning of crisis, especially of food and the rest of them.
There's also the story of Professor Adigun Agbaje, the former Deputy Vice Chancellor Academics of the University of Ibadan, who was kidnapped last week. Incidentally, it was an issue we discussed on Good Morning Nigeria yesterday in terms of the newspaper review, because we were, of course, expressing concern as to the fate of Professor Agbaje. And in the course of the program, I got messages that something positive was happening. Well, of course, there was a restraint on making further disclosures on what was happening to Professor Agbaje. It turned out that Professor Agbaje got released by his abductors, and yesterday his son issued a note of appreciation on behalf of the family to say that, look, he was still undergoing medical examination. And you read the headline, Nanabu, Professor Adegun Agbaje, indicating that he was shot at. Said the kidnappers shot through the windscreen, and the bullet grazed, went through his cap and then grazed his skull. That's a narrow escape, and it's a lucky one. And it just reminds me, I mean, we give thanks to God, Professor Adegun Agbaje, as we said, as I pointed out yesterday, and that's part of his record. He had been a guest on Good Morning Nigeria some years ago, joining us from Ibadan Network Center. He holds a first-class honors in political science, actually the first to make a first class in poll science from UI. Then, of course, he had also been a pioneer staff of the Guardian newspaper as a political correspondent. But the story of a bullet grazing his cap and his skull reminds me of an essay written by Lance Morrow. Lance Morrow, one of the finest writers in the US. The title of that essay was The Importance of Being Lucky. And Lance Morrow wrote that essay after then President Ronald Reagan survived an assassination attempt by John Hinckley Jr. in Washington, D.C. And I never forgot, Nadabo, part of the example, excuse me, I'm battling with a cold this morning. I never forgot part of the example that Lance Morrow gave in that essay. He said that, look, there's a story that is told of a soldier who was on the battlefield and he had a pocket scripture in his breast pocket, and then the bullet that was aiming for his heart was stopped by the pocket. That's the pocket-sized scripture that he had in his pocket. That's part of the illustration of the importance of being lucky. So in this case, Professor Adegun Agbaje has also been saved by his cap, taking the bullet and, of course, reducing the velocity and the grazing of his head. So we're grateful that he's come out of this life, but he did point out in that note of appreciation that some of the other captives were still there, and he was and he of course expressed utmost desire that they would also regain their freedom as quickly as possible. It points, of course, to the the sporadic attacks that we're having on our highways and in different locations. And that was a close shave with death, according to the Daily Sun newspaper, and we hope and pray that the remaining captives will be released, and of course, indeed, all captives, not only the remaining ones in that regard, but every other uncaptured by I don't want to sign off now, newspaper review. Just before we do, again, yesterday, Juma and I were on set, and we talked about the fact that it was a bloody weekend. No fewer than 100 persons died in Somalia following the twin car bomb explosions on the capital Mogadishu. In India, in the state of Gujarat, there was a suspension bridge that collapsed. At that time, we're hearing about 70-something persons who died. Now the figure is well over 130. 47 of them children, and over 160, of course, also died in the Halloween crush in Seoul, in South Korea. Now, I want to very briefly focus on what has happened so far in India. On account of the collapse of that bridge. A number of questions are already being raised, and the security authorities, the police, have already arrested 9 persons in connection with that, including officials of some of the, I would say, low-ranking officials of the company that renovated that bridge, and that the bridge was reopened before it was due to be reopened. Questions are also being asked about the competence of that particular company itself, that it doesn't appear to have competence in infrastructure maintenance or even infrastructure building in the country. What I'm saying there is that, look, they are saying it is not just sufficient that people are mourning and so on and so forth, but that there must be justice. If any person dropped the ball at any particular time, there must be justice. Justice must be served. In other words, if there is criminal negligence, then people must get punished for it. Okay, it's one of those things with contracts and contractors. Really, normally scrutiny is not being properly made, especially when they are being awarded contract. But all the same, Kingsley, one must also add that having to pile and get be on that bridge as many as they were too is another issue. It's another issue of concern. Who allowed it? That's where you have responsibility and accountability. Sure. You were selling tickets. If the bridge wasn't supposed to take more than 100 persons, they were said to be 500 persons. Why then did you sell tickets over and above the number. Precisely. So if it was greed, you pay for that greed.
Yeah. There's complicity in this anyway.
Absolutely, that.
And of course, that's the newspaper review for Good Morning Nigeria this morning. We'll take a break now. We'll be back with the program proper in a moment. Stay with us.
Good Morning Nigeria. We're live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. Now, before we commence our conversation, which is on reviewing national security strategies, we would like to take this background report by Abdusalam Jibril, our correspondent.
Recently, the United States of America, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and others warned their citizens to avoid traveling to Nigeria, particularly Abuja, warning of a potential terror attack in the capital city. Following the advisory, the U.S. suspended consular operations in Abuja and advised its staff and their families to relocate from the Nigerian capital. The travel advisory understandably caused panic within the Federal Capital Territory as well as across the country. President Muhammadu Buhari has since urged against panic, maintaining that the advisories do not mean an attack in Abuja is imminent. The president also advised the nation's security establishment and the entire citizens to continue being vigilant and careful with security. President Buhari subsequently summoned an emergency security meeting to further review and strengthen the security network in the country. After the meeting, the nation's security agency say there is no cause for alarm, urging Nigerians to go about their lawful businesses without fear of any kind. At the meeting, foreign partners were also advised not to work at cross purposes by creating unnecessary panic in the country. This is coming as some security experts have emphasized that the security situation has relatively improved in recent times across the country. They maintain that insurgency in the northeast and threats of separatists in the southeast have reduced considerably, adding that quite a number of insurgents alongside their families have so far surrendered. They, however, insist that the current national security strategy needs to be reviewed periodically, particularly with the upcoming 2023 general elections. Guests on the program will be speaking on these and other related security issues across the country shortly.
And to, review the country's national security strategy this morning, first let me introduce in our studio here the Director of Defense Information, Defense Headquarters, Abuja, Major General Jimmy Apple. We're very glad to have you this morning, Major General.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. And as usual, we have our regular here, Kabiru Adamu, Security Risk Management, who is here also to talk more about this very strategy as being put in place by the federal government. We're going to review that this morning. Welcome, Kabiru.
My pleasure. Good morning, Ndabo.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
All right, gentlemen, we're glad that you are here with us in the studios. Now, just some weeks ago, I'm not quite sure exactly which date of the month it was now, we had a conversation on Good Morning Nigeria, and this was on the heels of the visibly improved security situation in the country. And of course, our regular guest on the program, Dr. Kabir Adamu, was part of that conversation. There was some celebration, but there was also some cautionary note that it wasn't all over yet, that we should still be on our guard. And here we are, in the past week or so, it appears that it's become like the weather. Things have turned around, and there's some panic, there's some anxiety, particularly in the Federal Capital Territory, with the advisories coming from a number of embassies, and of course the federal government also responding and seeking to assuage the fears that have been generated by the advisories coming from the embassies. Let's begin with Major General Akbo. What is happening? Thank you. The security forces, they're on top of their game. Several security forces are established constitutionally to carry out different aspects of security for the nation. And like you alluded to, in the Northeast, where we have Operation Hadinkai, we are almost achieving the end state. And which is the end state? It is that state of affairs where people can rightly live their dreams. You also said, and which is the truth, that several insurgents have surrendered with their families on account of the activities of the military and other security agencies. People who have been displaced are returning to their ancestral homes to live their lives all over again in safer environment. Gradually, the end state is being achieved in the Northeast. And coming to the Northwest, the enemy of the state, the insurgents, are also receiving very bitter beating. And with the quantum component of fighting power, that is talking about the physical component, that is the totality of the destructive or disruptive force that the military has gotten. The insurgents are also being dealt with. In this North Central too, the security forces are on top of their game. And when we talk about the security alert, so to speak, the agencies of government have been working day and night. There will always be threats. Every state will always have an enemy. That must be said. But what are those institutions that have been established to ensure that the environment is safe? What are they doing? Are they sleeping? No. And even before the so-called alert, the security forces have been working. And in this circumstance where you don't see what is being done, the operations are intelligence driven. The operations are intelligence driven, but it is because you won't see what they are doing, you won't hear what they are doing, you won't know the quantum job that is being done on behalf of the citizenry. So, the security forces, they are on top of their game to keep the environment safe, and that they will continue to do. And therefore, like the president said, there's no cause for alarm because the security forces are keeping guard to keep everybody safe. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Major General Jimmy. Let's turn a little bit to Kabira Adamu here and then get his own perspective of the whole scenario as it's been unfolded, in the recent past, and then, occasioned by the United States, UK, travel advisory and security alert to Nigerians and, of course, residents of the FCT in particular. Major General Jimmy said the security personnel are on top of the game. And, of course, from what we heard yesterday, the outcome of the security meeting convened by the president, it's all about assurances and stronger assurances to all Nigerians that it's okay, and this is buttressed by what the Major General said, that every country, every nation, and every individual, to be more specific, must have an enemy insofar as you're alive. And that's the issue the security agencies are trying to really tackle. What do you make out of this, advisories being issued, and of course the government's response to these advisories vis-a-vis, or rather against the background of a renewed strategy, or Nigeria's new strategy to, fight insurgency and banditry and kidnapping, just as confirmed by the Major General, that especially in the Northeast, they're heading towards the end?
Thank you, Nadabu. Let me start by saying every country has a constitutional or statutory responsibility to protect its citizens. That is something you can't take away from any country. And in the case of Nigeria, it is of course enshrined in our constitution. Section 14, subsection 2 makes for that provision. However, when it comes to diplomatic relations or international relations, there are principles, there are protocols, there are several formal arrangements that have been made to avoid conflict between nations. Because of course when two interests come together, especially where there are differences in the two interests, the possibility of a potential conflict is extremely high. So protocols have been established. In other words, if you are in another country, you cannot do anything that will affect the local politics of the host country. So in this instance, our allies, because both the US, the UK, Australia, and several other countries that released that alert. It's a terror alert. I want to emphasize that point. And then they updated their travel advisory. And it has had consequences, adverse consequences, on especially the hospitality industry and several other components of our economy. Now that's not what friendly countries do. Friendly countries work together with their allies to support the stability of those allies. So in this instance, an acclaimed terror alert, and I use the word acclaimed, especially given the statements coming from the Office of the National Security Advisor, the Minister of Foreign Affairs yesterday, one can conclusively say that that terror alert was acclaimed. In other words, it could have been a misinterpretation of an intelligence feat that led to that terror alert. Again, I go back to established protocols within the diplomatic cycles. There are ways to have shared that intelligence with the Nigerian security agencies. As an example, at the risk of being a little bit too open, the National Intelligence Agency has established platforms for liaison sharing, intelligence liaison sharing between them and the United States and with the UK. So that's one avenue, as well as several other avenues to share that so-called intelligence between friendly allies, and then of course agree the best way to manage that intelligence. Now I'm also emphasizing this point because no foreign country can protect itself in another foreign country. It is the host country that mainly, primarily protects that foreign country. In other words, yes, that foreign country will have its own security arrangement, but essentially and ultimately that security arrangement relies on the protection of the host country. So what is the essence of releasing an alert that would trigger the type of reaction that we've seen? So again, I think that's something that is fundamental, but we need to come back and take responsibility. What do I mean take responsibility? Just like General mentioned.
Before, Kabir, before we get into taking responsibility, I would like us to further explore the apparent misuse of diplomatic channels of communication. I think that is also important. You raised a number of very important issues. One, to say that if your nationals, whether they are service personnel or private citizens, are in another country, you as a country far away, you do not have a primary responsibility for the protection of those persons, particularly with their diplomatic staff. There are international conventions that obligate the host country to protect those persons who are around. That's why, for instance, Nadabo, there is a special diplomatic protection unit operated by the Nigerian police, and so on and so forth. I was just coming to that as well in terms of appropriate channels, Major General. I don't have any information about you probably haven't been a defense advisor in any of our embassies abroad, but I haven't heard any report about our defense advisors in our missions abroad apprehending a security threat to their host country and then releasing that information directly to the citizens of that host country. This would appear to be abnormal.
Yes, to my knowledge, there has never been any such circumstance where our foreign missions released such security alerts in the country that they are resident. None of, to my knowledge, yes.
So that's why I'm coming to you. Because part of what we also hear, usually after the fact, after the long delay after the fact, to say, oh, and I've mentioned this during our newspaper review on Good Morning Nigeria, that you will hear OECD countries, that's to say they develop what they say, oh, they share intelligence, and that's how they were able to stave off some potential terror incident and so on and so forth. You don't hear them advising their nationals to evacuate?
So it is within their right. Let's not take that away from them. It is within their right to do anything to protect their citizens. We have to acknowledge that they have that right, as it were, but they also have a responsibility as enshrined in protocols that are well established within international relations and diplomatic conventions to respect certain components of the agreement they have with their host country. In this instance, the release of terror alerts, the evacuation measures are key practices within diplomatic relations. I can give you instances where we've had to evacuate our citizens from different parts of the world, but that evacuation is based on certain developments that are incontrovertible. I want to emphasize that point. As an example, a state of war or a state of conflict that has reached a point where the capacity of the host nation to protect the diplomatic representation is almost agreed has come to zero. Mali is an example. Developments that happened in Sierra Leone in the past, and Liberia, Somalia, Central African Republic. London, the conflict is well established. So the question, and I mean, I'm speaking now as a risk management specialist, what circumstance did we reach in Abuja that would have triggered an evacuation? I can't think of that circumstance. I've asked myself, there are exit points within Abuja, and I'm being careful. This is a public, space. The airport, the routes. There are, at least to my knowledge, 3 or 4 routes that you can use to exit Abuja, and I don't know of any non-state actor. I emphasize that point. Any non-state actor that has the capacity to ground this location that I've mentioned. Yeah, you could have a single attack. You could have multiple attacks. But just like General has mentioned,
and there have been no such incidents.
There have no. So even if there was information that something like that will happen, the best thing to have done was, especially I emphasize from an ally, is to work with our security agencies to address that threat, not to increase the potential of the threat. And I think this is where I stand.
To what extent did this terror alert jeopardize further security operations? Assuming that you were pursuing a thief, and at the point you were almost catching him, there was an alert that alerted the thief to the fact that he is being tailed. In an asymmetric operational environment like this, intelligence is very scarce and it evaporates very easily. And therefore, an aspect that we need to also interrogate is how much did the alert jeopardize further security operations, that we have to go back to the drawing board to pursue somebody that was almost apprehended. Well, those are other issues we need to...
Yeah, as you just raised this point, so we're trying to further put across the issue of how the alert has, sort of affected your operations. You earlier said in your opening salvo that you in the northeast, most especially, you're heading towards the end, crushing the Boko Haram insurgency and insurgents, and giving people the right and the opportunity to pursue their dreams, as it were. And here we are today in the midst of this measurable successes. We are getting some other, alerts that is trying to jeopardize or thwart this effort and making other people far away from the theater zone of the Northeast and the North Central, Northwest, that is, being apprehensive. Kavira Adamu, when you look at this, intelligence sharing in this regard would have been very much an advantage to both countries and to Nigerians generally. And you've also said that if there was to be any other, authority that will protect any foreigner anywhere, is the host country. That's the primary, protection. Even though they may have their own, protection as required by the law and conventions, but nonetheless, this very terror alert and the followed by the travel advisory, which I know prompted the meeting of the security yesterday in the villa, must have had an impact on the assumed security in the FCT and of course the surrounding places. To what extent has this meeting sort of mitigated this very fear and apprehension in the public?
It's work in progress. First off, Nigerians we look up to our leaders, and yesterday we saw our leaders meeting, and more importantly, our leaders spoke to us. As a result of that meeting, we got to know that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs had interacted with, as an example, the American Embassy. We got to know through the Minister of Foreign Affairs that interaction produced certain results, including, for instance, the acknowledgement by the U.S. Embassy that they were responding to a statutory responsibility to their citizens, that alert was meant for their citizens. Now, the next question that came to my mind when I heard that is, if that was the case, they created an inadvertent consequence, and what are they doing to help us to address that inadvertent consequence? We also got to hear from the Office of the National Security Advisor, perhaps that Nigeria was not privy to that intelligence. In fact, he used some terms to describe the action. I don't need to repeat those terms there. So that's good. That's why I say it is work in progress. We expect and we must acknowledge the fact that there are several ongoing security operations, like the General mentioned, some of them obvious, some of them not so obvious. As you are aware, I run a consultancy and we produce reports. In our August and September reports, we did show these operations across the 36 states of the Federation. Some of them military-led, others joint security operations involving several components of our security sector. And on a daily basis, they carry out interdiction, clearance operations that lead to arrest, sometimes that lead to the killing of some of these terrorists. And I expect a friendly ally to acknowledge that in making a terror alert, and not only to acknowledge that, to support those ongoing operations. So for instance, just like the General mentioned, if the release of a terror alert had the likelihood of circumventing an ongoing operation, a friendly ally should not release that terror alert. Rather, work with the home or host security government to ensure that that action is carried out. And even where there's an inadvertent action as a result of that terror alert, that friendly country should carry out follow-up actions. So let me give you an example in responding to your question. After that meeting, I would have expected the Federal Capital Territory Administration to convene a security meeting, conduct an audit of Abuja, identify vulnerabilities, and this is where I would have expected, for instance, our American friends to help us. They have a Homeland Security department, and if you go to the website of the Homeland Security Department, it has robust information on counter-terrorism as well as anti-terrorism. Now, that is one component that we need to work on locally here in Nigeria, and we can benefit from the support of the Americans. What kind of anti-terrorism measures do we as corporate organizations should implement to reduce our vulnerability to terrorist attack? So things like that would have I expected follow up from that meeting. And again, I want to emphasize that these are things that we can benefit from friendly allies such as the US, because they are advanced in the implementation of such measures.
You earlier mentioned the effect and the consequences of this alert on the economy of Nigeria. And when you also look at the political scene, that's going to be an effect too, because campaigns and whatever have been there have started. And then a lot of politicians have started making comments about that, some postponing their campaign schedules, some rescheduling, some, trying to, drag their feet and things like that. But I'm very much concerned about the economic aspect, the consequences. How much of this alert, how much damage has it, I must say, how much damage has it done to the economy, especially of the FCT?
So I'll give you instances, although we are yet to quantify the damage. Hospitality industry, 5-star hotels that have had conferences planned, a lot of that has been cancelled. Accommodation that had been booked, some of them cancelled. Others who had booked to stay for a long period had cut short their stay and left. Now, if you look at the ripple effect of that, the value chain, the supply channels that feed into the hospitality industry that would be damaged. And then big shopping malls, I don't want to mention names, one of them had to shut down. Look at the number of employees that depend almost on a daily basis for the effect of that. So again, it's not been quantified, but you can start getting an image of the consequences. Then let's not forget that when travel advisories are updated, in the case of that of the US, I think we were at level 2. And then now, as a result of the updating, they made it level 3. Now, businesses, especially American businesses, who have plans of conducting whatever foreign direct investment, other engagements with Nigeria, are going to depend on that categorization of the risk level in Abuja, either from a standpoint of the insurance for which they are going to, carry out their operations in Nigeria, or sometimes for even business decisions. So as a board, I would look at that categorization and say, do I come to Nigeria, or no, do I go to another country that has a lower risk level? So there will be long-term consequences of those categorizations. Now, before that categorization, was there any engagement between, for instance, the State Department and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Nigeria? So these are the kind of consequences on the economy and several other aspects of operations in Nigeria. You alluded to that of politics. Again, that is an inadvertent consequence of this development. I can bet you that as the campaign season starts, proper, there will be references to this action. It's going to benefit some components, while it's not going to be the disadvantage of other components. So was that intentional, or was it unintentional? These are things that we need to address as a country. When earlier on I was making reference to us taking responsibility, these are areas that I was looking at. I know General wanted to talk about.
Well, talking about the responsibility of the FCDA, I'm aware that from time to time, several security meetings are held to recalibrate the security architecture within the FCT. I'm very much aware of that. And with the security alert, several such meetings have taken place and measures are being taken. I mean, even before then, that's what I want to harp on. That nobody occupying a responsible position sleeps without carrying out his mandate. So even before this, I'm aware of several security meetings that are being held from time to time, and several activities to review the operation, the security architecture within Abuja. And talking about the security alert again, like Calvin Clausewitz, German military strategist, said that a trilogy of the will of the government, the passion of the people, and the competence of the military, sustains war. That is talking about conventional war. But in this circumstance, it still applies. What was the role of our own people to driving this narrative? What was the role they played in driving this narrative? And again, we must learn to trust and believe in our institutions, the capacity of our institutions to deliver. It is not today, they have been delivering right from time. I can speak, for the military. Right from the time of the Congo, talking about Liberia, Sierra Leone, Darfur, Somalia, Yugoslavia, and we have been, the institutions of government on top of and they have been delivering. How much does the citizenry believe in the institutions that they have? Because you cannot live on borrowed garb and be proud. You must nurture your own, believe in it, and grow it so that it can serve you and serve you better. It may not be that we are merged with another country's security forces before we can deliver. No, we have been delivering, and the records are there.
Yeah, General, well, thank you. I was just wondering, gentlemen, let us assume, for purposes of discussion, and then also assume the worst case scenario, that the terrorists were bent on wreaking havoc in the Federal Capital Territory. Against the backdrop of the successes being recorded by the security and intelligence forces in other theaters of engagement around the country, what would be the objective of saying, look, let us hit the Federal Capital Territory?
For the terrorists, number one, publicity.
Yes.
Any attack in the FCT would generate publicity, especially if that target is a target that has some element of either association with government or association with an international government or organization. We recall the UN attack, how it was highlighted all over the world. Till today, that attack unfortunately still reverberates within the media. That's what terrorists want. Number two, we're about to have an election. Some of the terrorist groups are interested in thwarting that election. An attack in the FCT would have a consequence on the elections, on the outcome of the elections. It would be used by certain elements within the electoral process to achieve certain objectives. So, and then apart from that, it would also highlight or increase the profile of the whatever group that perpetrated that attack. Let's not forget that especially two of the terrorist groups in Nigeria, the Jamaat al-Sunnah al-Dawat wal-Jihad, that we all call Boko Haram, is affiliated to an international group, Al-Qaeda. The other one, Islamic State in West Africa Province, is affiliated with IS. Now, there have been changes within the leadership structure of each of these groups. And following those changes, we know that their affiliates across the world have been trying to gain prominence. They've been carrying out attacks and pledging allegiance to the new leadership. So any action they take that would increase that profile would help them in terms of recognition by the new leadership. So those are all incentives, as it were, for an attack within the...
I understand your explanation, Dr. Kabir Adamu. If we roll back the tape, you mentioned the UN building, very unfortunate incident. We also recall that the police headquarters here in the city was attacked, shopping mall, shopping complex in Muslim motor parks were also attacked in the Federal Capital Territory, but then came a pushback.
The data,
there was a pushback.
The last time we had what is clearly a terrorist attack in the FCT was 2015. Some have categorizing the Kuje incident as terrorist attack. It's neither here nor there. Depending on where you stand, you can categorize it. If you have strong arguments, I do, against categorizing it as a terrorist attack. So if we isolate the Kuje incident, the last time we had a terrorist attack is 2015, and we must applaud our security agencies. We know the enemy is trying to carry out attacks, but they successfully, I want to emphasize that one, prevented that attack since 2015. Anyone who lives in FCT or Abuja, if you recall what was in in 2014 and 2015, and you look at what is today, you must applaud our security agencies. That does not remove the fact that there are still vulnerabilities. And when I mentioned earlier on work in progress, I'm a specialist. I assume sometimes the role of the enemy, and I see those vulnerabilities. We need to increase our anti-terrorism measures. I don't want us to lose that.
We can get into details, yeah. All right. General, no, I still would like you to comment on this. As I said, we've seen a pushback. Citizens cooperated and citizens collaborated. But, you know, for those who are not members of the security and intelligence forces, there is a limit to which you can be paranoid about security threats. After a while, you just go about your business. If you reside in the Federal Capital Territory, and again, following the terror alerts issued by these embassies, everybody would have received tons of messages from saying, look, is everything okay? Is everything okay? We've had cause to say on Good Morning Nigeria that we are broadcasting, as always, live from our Abuja headquarters studios. The fact that we're in the studios today, we're here yesterday, of course, there's the grace of the Almighty. If you have your breath, you can continue to carry out the function. Tell our viewers, look, is the FCT so vulnerable to any would be probably just a stray dog who decides to cause havoc or mayhem?
Well, our citizens are free to move anyway, but not every citizen or that wishes to cause harm. Like I will stress again that those institutions that are responsible for keeping the environment safe are working. I also want to come back to what I said earlier about the trilogy and the passion of the people. Now, as citizens, we must become very active citizens. Yes, they are active citizens, but we need to have many more in that contingent. Talking about responsibility of the citizenry, we must now start knowing who our next neighbor is. It is no longer proper for you not to know your neighbors. I mean, for the good and for the bad times, though, you know, we must begin to take citizenship as a serious responsibility that you must make sacrifices of time, sometimes sacrifices of injury, and sometimes sacrifices of death. It is not only the military or security agencies that have that obligation. Every citizen has that obligation to his nation, to keep the environment safe. Take, for example, those who were in that train that took the risk to send text messages to the Commissioner for Internal Security and Home Affairs of Kaduna State. That was a risk. But that galvanized an action. I tell you of a young boy who was in secondary school and a policeman was pursuing a thief. He threw his baton and he missed. He took it again, and this thief was running across the path of a young boy. And he considered, was this thief going to escape? He ran and grabbed the thief. But it was not without a prize. The thief gave him an elbow blow, the pain which the boy nursed for almost a week. That is to tell you that citizenship comes with responsibility. And we must all pick our civic responsibilities and start living our civic responsibilities. It is not enough for citizens to remain aloof and expect that the security man should know your neighbor more than you.
If you say knowing your neighbor, gentlemen, when we say knowing when General says know your neighbor, it isn't just to say, oh, Nadabo is my neighbor, Nadabo says Kingsley is my neighbor.
if you see any unusual activity, I'm not saying be a busybody. If you see any unusual activity, at time, anybody who is trying to break the law will always have some oddities. You see me mixing some things in the morning. I don't go to work in the morning. I don't go to work in the afternoon. I come back in the night. You perceive some smell. These are the kind of things we're talking about. I mean, you don't have to be a ballistician. That's to say, an expert, in ballistics to recognize that something might just be amiss.
Really, knowing your neighbor in this regard is just very important. Remember how we all grew up. Everybody knew almost everybody in an area because you know who comes in as a stranger and who lives and when he lives and things. But today, here we are, maybe population explosion and technology and things like that. People are almost like each to himself, and then nobody is for all as it used to be. But still, coming back to the issue you raised, Major General, Nigerians, I think, have been a little bit trying in this regard, trying to be part of the fight against insecurity and be part of that very struggle to keep the society secured. A recent example could be given from, Niger State here, where, community members and vigilantes and whatever help the military in trying to apprehend some of the, the bandits and terrorists that attacked an army barrack. And we can also see the example of the JTF in Maiduguri and Borno State, and of course some other places in the northwest. And where
active citizens.
Yes, and these are all active citizens. But I don't know, why are you pushing us through in trying to make Nigerians realize that the citizenship right is still not very much explored?
Well, like you said, a segment of the citizens are doing their best possible to ensuring that they live as active citizens. I'm only saying that we really need the whole of society to be involved in this.
Is that possible?
It is possible.
How?
It is possible. And it's a narrative that must be pushed out.
Let me comment. So under our national counterterrorism strategy, there's a component called countering violent extremism. We don't speak about it enough.
Countering violent
extremism, CVE, is an active component that seeks to ensure the participation of citizens. The realization that the only way terrorism can thrive is where they have influence led to the development of that CVE. And it's a very active document. It has a policy component, it has a framework, and then as far as I know, it has an implementation plan. Now that is, I think, where the gap is. To respond to your question, we need to enhance the implementation of that framework, take it away from the federal level, take it to the state level, take it to the community level, take it to the grassroots level, so that the market woman in my village, in Bogondaji, in Sokoto State, understands her role within the national security architecture. She understands that if she's all of a sudden, she used to sell, let's say she boils 5 akara, she sells 100 naira akara every day. All of a sudden she starts selling 10,000 naira. That something is wrong. She's benefiting, but as a citizen she knows that something is wrong, and she's able to tell the market leader that, look, I've seen an increase in my sales. Can you find out who the person that is buying this akara, why he's buying that? Now that is intelligence. That market leader would take it upwards, report it somewhere. It becomes part of the intelligence fusion. So that is what CVE does. It raises the awareness of citizens to understand their contribution to security. Now the beauty, and this is what I find amazing about our country, we're gifted intellectually. We've got these beautiful policies, but the level of implementation of these policies, I think, is where we need to look at. I hear even governors speak, and unfortunately from their statements I get to realize they don't know of the existence of this framework, this countering violent extremism, even in terror-laden locations that you would expect the governors will be at the forefront of the implementation of that document. So I think that is where we need to look at, and the role of organizations that have the responsibility for advocacy and sensitization of the citizenry, I think should be emphasized in that regard.
You see, Dr. Kabir, again, of course, I mean, you are a regular guest on Good Morning Nigeria. At the end of the day, the latter part of your comment will devolve, say, on the National Orientation Agency, which will then lead further to the abdication of the collateral duties of the subnational entities. Why would it be, for instance, that subnational entities do not actively seek out documents of this nature and say, all right, this is what concerns us. This is what concerns us. So we're going to break it down. There is no subnational government today, let's say at the state level, that doesn't have a radio station or a television station, or for that matter, a Ministry of Information.
Exactly.
You could have attached to it Ministry of Information and Orientation, Ministry of Information and Arts and Culture, and so on. You have that. What do those institutions do at their state level? And we're talking about flood and alert to citizens to say, look, flood is coming, go to higher ground. Now it comes, shoots people away. Over 610 persons died in the course of the flood. So what is it that the state governments in particular, and then local governments as well, to say, like the sensitization you're talking about in terms of
security,
citizen duty. You gave the typical example of, say, an akara seller who sees a spike in the business from, say, 1,000 naira daily to 5,000, and the same customer who is coming to come up buying up all this akara, sometimes 7,000, another time 10,000. Is it the business, for instance, of Noah directly? Is it the business of General directly? Or is it your business? There is a local government in that area. That local government will go there collecting rates. The first thing they will do is, pay your money. Otherwise, they will collect. So if you can collect rates from me, why can't you also enlighten me?
So I think this is a tip, frankly, you are giving to those that are campaigning to be our next men. And I hope that when we interrogate them, these are the kind of questions that I would ask them. What do they intend to do to block the gap between the federal and subnational structures to ensure that when we have a policy, it's not just a federal policy, it's a national policy that involves both the federal and state government. And I keep on saying in my analysis of the current security situation that one of the gaps that we have is this, as it were, gap between the federal and state levels in terms of the coordination of security policies. As part of this conversation, I think we need to talk about the value system. We need to talk about social cohesion, because they all have an impact on the point that General made. If our value system is reinvigorated the way we used to know it, I mean, I remember it growing up as a kid. If a particular family is accused of, let's say corruption, the likelihood of even that family getting a spouse for their kids is affected. But today, the same person who is corrupt, who went to steal money, you would see parents, desirous of giving their children to that family. Exactly. So what happened to our value system? How do we start changing that orientation? And these are things that I think we need to discuss as a people. Again, we're in a pre-election year. We've been presented manifestos, or we're still being presented. We need to, as a people, start interrogating these components. And security is not just guns and weapons or uniforms.
Sirens.
Yes, it has all of these components that we're discussing, and I think we need to galvanize that. We talk about kinetic and non-kinetic component. So this is the time, I think, to see how we can have a synergy of these two, so that at the end of the day we have what we want. In conclusion, I want to also mention the social contract. It would be unfair to sit and put the responsibility of security on citizens. The trilogy that General referred to has components of government, it has components of the security sector, and has components of citizens. If when you look at the social contract, each of these components will play a key role. Perhaps the role of government is higher, because in that social contract we abdicated certain of our rights and put on government.
I'm remembering now one of the issues that we raised when we had this conversation on the improved security situation in different parts of the country. And one idea that emerged from that, I'm sure Kado will confirm this, was to say, yes, the citizens on their own have a role, but that Nigeria probably has the largest collection of security persons, civil security persons, than anywhere in the world. If you go to most affluent neighborhoods, even middle-class neighborhoods, every house has a security guard. Every house has a security guard. And if there are formal security companies, there's a requirement for them to also recruit ex-service personnel. What do we do with intelligence from these civil, if you like, almost informal but semi-formal subsectors? To say, for instance, that an estate, you always seen Kingsley. He would drive in, he would drive out, he comes out at a particular time. Whenever he's coming, it's always with Nadabo. So what do they do?
Before you even respond as a general response, we will take a break. But before we go on break, let me just buttress what you just said. We want us to, when we come back, we just pick on from there. We earlier mentioned the issue of how skewed the society was in the 60s, 70s, and the early 80s, when almost everybody knew everybody, and everybody knows who the stranger was and who lives and who comes. And for reasons of population, which are maybe technology and expansion and whatever, these things have not been jettisoned, and then everybody has become to himself and to himself and to his family. This was talking about each and every middle-class society or family has a security guard, and of course, galvanizing or harnessing all this to form a security for that very ward and unit is what is required in order to replace that old security system. The issue of the woman's Sela Akara is one other point that points to the direction of the fact that the local society, the local government, for instance, and indeed the individual family unit, has a role to play in this regard. Now, the issue and the question now is, when we come back from the break, is to look at how do we use technology in this regard that brought this very strategy of the past and then brought up a new way of life, and how do we use it in order to move forward and enhance the security in the family unit, in the society, and of course in the state and the nation generally. You're watching Good Morning Nigeria. We'll take a break. Stay with us for this and responses to this and many more issues.
You're still watching Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. Our two guests are still here with us in the studios. Major General Jimmy Akwa, who is DDI, that's Director of Defense Information, and our regular guests on security matters, Dr. Kabir Adamu. Before we went on that break, Nadabo was re-emphasizing one of the issues I was placing on the table, namely a recall of a suggestion that was made when we had a conversation on what needed to be done to further ramp up security awareness and then, of course, ensure that citizens get more involved in security watch. And we're talking about the plenitude of private security guards, whether guard or private security firms, and how to energize that level of intelligence gathering as part of our security enhancement. Dr. Kabir.
Thank you, Kingsley. The current security architecture that we have sees the role of private security companies being supervised by the Civil Defense Corps. So that organization, which by the way reports to the Ministry of Interior, should galvanize the harnessing of intelligence from private security companies. As at 2001, the number of private security operatives in the country was around 10 million. So what it means is that we are allowing 10 million Nigerians who have access to intelligence to not contribute to the intelligence collection capabilities that we have as a country. I want to think that one of the best ways to harness that intelligence is to ensure that the civil defense put in place the appropriate mechanism for the collection of live, for the collection of periodic, as well as the collection of analysis of intelligence. I'll give you an example without mentioning names. There are private security companies in Nigeria that have attained international certifications, ISO certifications globally So what it means is that they can operate in any part of the world because of that ISO classification. The only thing we have not done for them is to arm them. But in terms of the standards that they have put in place, they are recognized globally. So those organizations, based on the intelligence analysis that they do, can help our national security posture. There are companies like the one I lead. The reports we produce are of an international standard, and all of that can be fed into our security collection, capability, especially the intelligence collection capability. So again, I think it's the responsibility of the NSDC to harness that intelligence and make that intelligence available. I'm hoping that, I think it's high time for a review of the Nigeria Security Agencies Act. It was passed under a military era, and as far as I know, from the First Republic, Second Republic into the Fourth Republic, we've not had a review of that act. Perhaps a review of that act will enhance some of these intelligence collection capabilities that I've mentioned. Let's not forget that the private security companies are not the only one. You need to look at an organization such as the Man O' War that has grassroots representation, which incidentally is under the Ministry of Youth and Sports, I think. You need to look at the VGN, Vigilante Group of Nigeria, I think, which is, I'm not even sure under which ministry it's under. The last time I was here in one of, not the last time, in one of the programs, we talked about the role of tricycle operators, and the co-discussant told us the number of tricycle operators, how we had harnessing the intelligence from groups like that. NURTW, the fact that they are on the route every day. Precisely. Before anything happens, they know on the route. How we harnessing that kind of intelligence. So I think we need the review of that act to see the role all of these ministries and organizations can play under the auspices of the Office of the National Security Advisor. I think it's one of the ways to...
And something also could be said of the Boys Brigade, for instance, and the JNI, security outfits and all these religious security outfits that really, take care of the security at congregations and mosques and churches.
Event centers, exactly. Like so we need to recognize the role of all of these individual organizations, but more importantly, how do we harness it? How do we fit it into our national intelligence collection capabilities? I know your question before we went on break had to do with technology. Technology is a force multiplier. There are two major intelligence collection capabilities. What is called HUMINT, which is human intelligence, and then what is called TechInt, that's technical intelligence. In our case, because of the deficit of infrastructure that we have, HUMINT appears to be the most plausible option for us. But the first multiplier is technology. And as an example, someone in a community in Adamawa State, let's use Madagali as an example, he picks up intelligence. The easiest way to communicate that intelligence in the most speediest of manner is through technology. You don't expect him to walk or enter a vehicle and bring it to Yola. So that's the real kind of technology can play. But again, in the modern world, especially with the advent of new technology, cyberspace is an avenue for the collection of intelligence. A lot of what happens in the physical world starts from the cyberspace, and that is where I think the role of the Ministry of Digital Economy, I think, and communications, the role of that ministry. Again, in the review of the act that I advocated, we need to find a place for that ministry. I'm not sure how, because it comes with a lot of consequences.
There are so many things in that minister's regards, for sure.
Apart from that, the fact that there will be concerns within the civil society space on, freedom of, communication, privacy of communication. So we need to find a way to ensure that we protect the integrity of our privacy as well as confidentiality, but at the same time we're able to harness the intelligence that is within that ministry. I have a lot of suggestions, but this is a public space, so I'll leave it at that.
As a security expert anyway, so leave it at that. We try to so much economically with the facts this time around, which is useful. It's good anyway. Major General Jimmy. Yes. We're reviewing national security strategies, and we've talked about a lot of issues that ranges from the individual in the family unit up to the organizations, federal and national, subnational governments and local local governments. In your own case, looking at this very strategy that has been reviewed and looking at how Nigerians respond to it, especially against the background of the, U.S. terror alert and of course the travel advisory they issued, what do you think would be, the responsibility in this regard, finally, as we end up this program, the responsibility of the individual citizen, in spite of the fact that you said he should, as a matter of fact, take up his citizenship right into his hands and then use it properly. The person in the street may not really understand what you said in this regard because he's there, pursuing how to make ends meet. The next meal, for instance, is a bit difficult to get. And you're talking about security, he may even be vulnerable to any other thing you can think about. In this scenario, and what the United States terror alert brought about, and the recent meeting of the security chiefs yesterday, what do you think would an ordinary Nigerian make out of this, and what should he do as an interim measure?
Thank you very much. It's not anything out of the box, so to speak. As he goes about his normal daily business, everybody has to be, eyes have to be open. Be aware of your environment, wherever you are. Like the cliche now, if you see something, say something.
Yeah.
And I want to disagree with a brother here regarding busybodies or a little. When it comes to national security issues, I will actually urge all of us to be busybodies. We should actually be busybodies when it comes to national security issues. But if you have a deviant and he runs into your house, you should vomit him.
That's a good word.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. So that the environment can be safe for you and for others. If you keep him and hide him, the day he will be beating you at home, well, you will live to view your own, the fact that you hid him from being prosecuted. So that is what I talk about, being active citizens. Even if your son committed an offense, you must be able to produce him. It is by producing him that you will help to complement the effort of others to keep the environment safe. So as we go out to do our daily businesses, we must keep our eyes open. And for national security issues, we must all be busybodies. So that even if a terrorist act had been committed, the activities leading to the arrest of the terrorists will not just evaporate. We have a system where if an act has been committed, getting to know who committed the terrorist act is another issue. But in other crimes that we always quote, you will see somebody who will say that somebody walked past here, and as he was passing, he was throwing his arms in a manner that suggested something different. And if you ask him further, he will be able to sketch the person he feels could be responsible. That is active citizenship.
That's right. General, thank you very much. Let me raise this. I have two issues to raise. They're not totally, they are part of the security mix. One has to do with communicating what the citizen finds to be unusual. The numbers that have been released, I have difficulty. I don't remember any of those numbers personally. You give an 11-digit numbers. How does a citizen remember that? Earlier, we were told security numbers were 112. Now we are hearing 193. I've said last weekend I've been reading 190. And I just asked this simple question. I know that's for the NCC. People sing with it. Somebody help me call 911. The fact that 911 is in the use in the US doesn't mean that we are bad from using 911 in Nigeria. 911 was also a model of a Mercedes truck, 911 Mercedes Benz. So if you say 911, one day is a 112, another time 122, another time 193, another time they will give you 777. You just, how do you remember those things when you are faced with an emergency? That's one. Second leg of my question, again unrelated. Are we doing enough to apprehend persons who are broken loose from our jails? After the NSAS riot, or during the NSAS riot of 2 years ago, how many of those who broke free from jails, from the various jails, have been picked up? Some of them, of course, were picked up circumstantially to say, oh, the person went to commit another offense and you grabbed him. But how many of them have slithered back into society? Kuje, 3 months ago, how many of the escapees are back in the camp? Kabiru.
I will gladly throw over that question. And to say it categorically, they are in people's houses. They are back to the society and probably back to their parents' houses, their brothers' houses, their mothers' houses. They are in the villages, they are in the towns, they are in the cities. And they have neighbors. And you don't expect the policeman or the security man to know your neighbor more than you do. These people have filtered into the society and they are in houses. And that is where I say that the trilogy, we must live by it for us to have a saner society, environment. We must live by it.
Okay, General, in that regard, we throw it back to now. Taking a cue from what you just said, they are in people's houses. How much has the law, or how much is the law, how far is the law, I would say, dealing with such people in the society if they are apprehended?
So we need
not really the culprits, though the victims, but say the family relations and things.
If they knowingly, that the next year has to be knowingly.
Yeah, that's it.
I think there is room for improvement in that regard. I'm not aware that we've made examples. Instances are there where convicts, escaped convicts, have been arrested, but I'm not aware that in one instance where those who aided and abetted, they are hiding from the law.
Of recent, one of those who escaped from the Kuje prison was arrested in those states, being harbored by his brother, and both of them were arrested. Investigation is ongoing. That much I know. But then, circumstantial, you said, but I know the police have arrested a few of those who escaped from the Kuje prison. Also, I think the Security and Civil Defense Corps has arrested some too, and also. So,
Major General,
asking that let me explain something.
I'm just asking that question to maybe use it as if the law takes its full course, it may serve as a deterrent for others. That's just the point I'm driving at. But not just to have
harboring a fugitive.
So that
I said for harboring a fugitive. Look, let me know. So, I remember this story very well. We're going to have to call it time now in this conversation segment. I was in the US sometime, just watching television, and there was a news report about a gentleman who had been apprehended by some plainclothes officials. He had been on the run on the Eastern Board. That's the tri-state area: New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. He had been on the loose for 32 years. Going about his normal business, going about his normal activities, XYZ. And that day that they came and knocked at his door, and they got him, when he said, and he himself also said it, He said, yes, I am the one you are looking for. 32 years. So if the law wants to get you, the law will get you.
The long arm of the law.
The long arm of the law is very long. The arm of the law, that's why government is always there. So these are the kind of things, but obviously, gentlemen, you have raised very important issues today. It's a conversation that we can, at just one point, not about, sorry, we're going to sign off now.
Yeah.
During these floods that we had, devastating as it was, we didn't hear of any prison that were flooded and then the inmates escaped. Kotokafe, for instance, which when we already have a jailbreak, XYZ, you know, Kotokafe was flooded.
They're not on waterways,
most likely, but no, that's a happy feeling that we should have. Otherwise, it would have been so easy for the warders and everybody to open the gates and go. Dr. Kabir Adamu, regular guest on Good Morning Nigeria and security risk management experts. Always a delight having you on the program.
Pleasure is mine. Thank you. Thank you.
And Major General Jimmy Apple, who is Director of Defense Information at Defense Headquarters here in Abuja, we thank you for being our guest on the program. Thank you. All right, so let's go over now to sports.
Nigeria's Bayelsa Queens lost 2-1 to champions Melody Sundowns in their Group B opening game at the 2022 CAF Women's Champions League in Morocco on Monday. Lolona Dewati bagged the first brace of this year's edition as